There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Those were the words of Leonard Cohen, who died last week. At times like this, talking about optimism, talking about hope, talking about a better future, it almost seems like a joke, satire. Because this has been a pretty monstrous year.
Sorry to keep you waiting, complicated business, complicated.
And of course, the most 2016 thing that could have happened was the election of President Donald Trump. 3 words which will take a while for us to adjust to. But I am going to talk about hope partly because there is no point me doing these videos or any of us who believe in social change or building a better world. If we don't believe in hope, then we should just get off the stage. No point just whinging about things. I mean, I am going to whinge about things in this video, don't get me wrong. This is one of the greatest calamities to befall the Western world for generations. This is a man who spent his campaign smearing Mexican immigrants.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
A man who promised to build a wall on the Mexican border.
Build that wall! Build that wall!
A man who attacked a judge in a way that made even fellow Republicans accuse him of racism. A man who attacked the grieving parents of a dead American soldier who was Muslim. A man who spoke about women in the most misogynistic and degrading terms imaginable.
And when you're a star, they let you do it.
A man who mocked disabilities.
I don't remember!
And there are all too few checks on this man, because he's got the Senate, the House of Representatives, and soon he'll have the Supreme Court. And this is not somebody who accepts democratic norms, or the norms of the American Republic.
Folks, the system is rigged. It's rigged, okay?
If he faces obstructions, which he undoubtedly will, then he will retaliate in a way which other presidents would not do, who accept at least the constitutional order. But what's more frightening about Donald Trump isn't him, it's the people around him. Let me quote someone. The racist, fascist extreme right is represented footsteps from the Oval Office. Be very vigilant, America. Those are the words of a Republican, John Weaver, the former chief strategist of a Republican candidate, John Kasich. Take Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon is to be the chief strategist in the Trump White House. Now, Steve Bannon is described as the equal of Reince Priebus, who'll be the chief of staff. Who is Steve Bannon? He's the former chief executive of Breitbart News, a white nationalist hub, which has been accused of racism and anti-Semitism. It's got headlines like the following: would you rather your child had feminism or cancer? According to his ex-wife, he didn't want to send his kid to a school because there were too many Jewish kids there. Then there's Mike Pence. Now, Mike Pence is an anti-LGBT bigot. Last year, as governor of Indiana, he signed an anti-LGBT religious liberty law. He supported so-called conversion therapy to cure gay people of their sinful homosexuality. He said that equal marriage for same-sex couples would lead to societal collapse. According to him, being gay is a choice. There's other homophobic bigots in there for good measure, like Newt Gingrich, who speaks about gay fascism. I mean, there's fascism to be worried about, but it's not gay fascism in this case. You can see how this pans out, because Donald Trump is intolerant of criticism.
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
When things start to get sticky for him, which they will, when there's dissent, what do you think he's going to do? I mean, he's a guy who spends much of his time berating media outlets that criticise him and hoping that they go bankrupt.
They're such honourable people.
Well, he's soon about to have the American state and security apparatus behind him, including an FBI which, let's face it, did try and swing it in favour of Donald Trump at a crucial part of the campaign. What's going to happen when the growing protest movements start swelling and police respond to them with brutality and then things escalate? How will Donald Trump respond? There's a very good chance of the entire democratic and republican order in the United States being eroded and an increasingly authoritarian society built, along the lines, if you like, of Vladimir Putin in Russia, of Viktor Orban in Hungary, and of course the government in Turkey as well. These are all societies that maintain democratic trappings, but they're so-called managed democracies at best, where dissent is curtailed and attacked in very clever, very devious ways. What about the international order? You know, for much of the 20th century, the radical left was portrayed as stooges of Moscow. How ironic, then, that the hard right coming to power is actually leading to a capitulation to Putin's Russia. Because if anyone celebrated Donald Trump's victory, it was his good friend Vladimir Putin. What's going to happen with China, a ascendant power, when he starts a trade war with them? How is that going to escalate exactly? And what will that mean for the rest of the world? Now, as a Brit, I can't exactly look over at the Atlantic smugly and think, oh, those bloody Americans, what are they up to now? Because clearly in the aftermath of Brexit, lots of demons have been released in my own society that are now running rampage, where we treat dissent as treason. Well, I don't, but the mainstream media increasingly does. Where we've seen a huge increase in hate crimes, and we're seeing terrible reports of similar hate crimes now in the United States, a harrowing echo of what's happened here in our own country, where a right-wing populism is triumphant and is attempting to sweep away all before it. How did somebody, a demagogue, an unhinged bigot like Donald Trump, a plutocrat, a failed business person, all the rest, we could go on, how did he become the most powerful man in the world? Well, history will look back at that and have some pretty damning judgments. Let's talk about the failures of successive administrations, Republican and Democrat, when it comes to deindustrialisation and the economic insecurity that's been bred as a result. Let's talk about the racism and Islamophobia and misogyny that the Republican Party has fanned and promoted alongside their media outlets. Let's talk about, to be honest, the naivety of running a candidate like Hillary Clinton, who is seen as establishment they come at a time when anti-establishment sentiment is sweeping the entire Western world. Let's talk about voter suppression in places like Wisconsin, which have disproportionately meant that Democratic voters, particularly black Americans, were unable to vote in this election. A large majority of white voters backed Donald Trump. Every single category of white voter supported Donald Trump except college-educated white women. An overwhelming majority of African Americans voted to stop this disaster from happening and save the world from the unfolding disaster. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to counterbalance the number of white people who voted the other way. Where do we go from here? Well, bear in mind, Donald Trump lost the popular vote. Most Americans saw what he offered and they rejected it. When Trump wrongly thought that Obama had lost the popular vote back in 2012, he called for people to march on Washington in protest. Well, let's heed his advice. Because somebody like this, who poses such a monstrous threat to American democracy, to the minorities that make up the great diverse society of the United States, and threatens the world as a whole, the idea that everybody sits on their hands and does nothing, well, I think history will judge that pretty damningly if we do. Now, already we've seen huge protests in the United States, because bear in mind, there is another United States. That other United States of decency and equality and justice, that America's still there and it's mobilising now. And that other America could save all of us. A broad coalition of people in the United States has to be built. It means taking on the old democratic establishment, which I'm afraid does have a lot to answer for. It means confronting the racism and the misogyny that afflicts American society and is partly responsible for what's happened. And it's looking at how the economic insecurity collides with that racism and has partly produced the monster which now threatens to envelop American democracy. Now, a lot of people go, well, stick your nose out of this, nothing to do with you. Well, obviously, everything that happens in the United States has a massive impact on the rest of us. And we won't be able to solve this problem one country at a time, because what's happened in the United States is just one manifestation of a phenomenon sweeping the Western world now. Next year, there'll be elections all across Europe in which the hard right and the far right will make big gains. And in a nightmare scenario, in France, we could see Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader, be becoming president of the country. Links are already being made between Marine Le Pen's camp and the Trump presidency. Now, I'm not saying Trump is Mussolini, and he's certainly not Hitler, but he is a right-wing authoritarian leader who does threaten American democracy. And the American establishment is divided on how they respond. Well, the American establishment is largely responsible for this mess in the first place. So that's why, in the proud tradition of Americans and Europeans before them, who stood up for democracy and who stood up against xenophobia and racism, well, that's the only hope for America, and it's the only hope for the world. So given we all face this problem, let's unite across our borders, let's stand together, as we've stood together many times in the past, to defend LGBT people, Muslims, immigrants, minorities, women, all the people now threatened, to stand up for democracy, to deal with the economic and social insecurities that in part, not entirely, but in part, are responsible for what's happened. And if we do that, then we will overcome, and this dark period of our history, but in the end, this too shall pass. Because the illusion of every single age is the way things are now, are the way things will always be. At the moment, they're triumphalist, and they're victorious, and the people they're up against are very scared. But they are going to be defeated. They've been defeated before, and they will be defeated again. But it needs courage, determination, and resilience. And I think lots of people watching this have that in abundance. So let's get to it.